Whoops. Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubs at the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, joined by two of my favorite people in the whole world. We've got Martin Heemstra coming at you live from Moscow, Idaho. Martin, how's it going?
It's going good. My hopefully I should have a new PC next week so you can all see my lovely positive outlook face next week, but who knows for sure. I am happy to be back.
I sure hope you get that fixed. It sure would be dang swell to see that face of yours. And then over in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, last but not least, Bryan Marceau. Bryan, the facial reactions, where are we going with this?
No, it's just the language, man. I love it. So last week, spoiler alert for those wanting a worthless history lesson, I said last week was my flu game episode. Yeah, not quite. This was my flu game episode for reals. But otherwise, man, things going well here. We will take a week off at least of volleyball stuff because we talk about that as batched news so that we have discussion points. There's a little bit of volleyball stuff. We're going to choose to wait a little bit longer to further discuss. But so today's a basketball, basketball, however you want to slice it day, Dallas, which I think is a little bit more what most people expect to talk about this time. So I'm ready to roll.
Let's just jump right into it then, guys. So we obviously the news has been out there for quite a while that the coaching staff has been filled out for Vandal football. We haven't gotten into it just in the way that the shows work. We do one show a week, and sometimes it just is one of those things we just don't get to. So
can I pause really quick? Just one extra thing. Hey, just like pull the curtain back, guys. Off-season football news is not time sensitive whatsoever. So full disclosure, we batch football news so we can attach it to other episodes. So we get like a complete episode worth of stuff.
Well, you could have the Alabama situation where there's have a coordinator and then leaves after a month.
Well, there's that, but like, hey, big picture, we try to record at least once a week and have around the same time. Well, football itself, if you Football offseason news lends itself very well to that being put on whatever week it happens to work on. That's why, like, hey, Martin, you did the football recruits episode with Patty, where you walk through the majority of players. Then we had the signing day, but we've had weeks where we push stuff back. It's not a big deal. Again, football is king, but off season, it's not time sensitive whatsoever. So that's another really long, not important history lesson for those curious. You are welcome. Dallas, take the wheel.
Absolutely, Brian. So again, if you're listening to this and you're one of the few people that probably doesn't know about this, you can go read about it on govandals.com or go check Twitter at any point in the last month or so. But Dan Jackson is in as the new Vandals defensive coordinator, comes to us from Vanderbilt. On the 23rd of January, the final announcement was made to flesh out the staff in total. Guys shifting around internally. Tyler Sutton now coaching tight ends and the special teams coordinator. Matt Linehan has taken over the recruiting coordinator duties, and David Loze is now the defensive line coach. He's taken on the edges responsibility after Coach Oswega is not returning next year. So, Brian, before we get into the new coaches, any quick reactions to hearing those three guys getting a little bit more to do on their daily task list?
Yeah, I mean, I felt pretty good about the announcement overall. You know, to me, the biggest spot to fill was special teams coordinator. You know, when Thomas Ford left for Oregon State, and Eck had made mention during last football season to some people potentially changing roles. And Tyler Sutton is a guy who I feel is kind of overqualified for being at Idaho right now. He'd been an offensive coordinator previously, and he was recruitment coordinator plus tight ends coach. Honestly, I didn't think there's a prayer Sutton was going to be here for a third year when he first signed on. So if this keeps him here for another year or two, fantastic. You know, Sutton for sure, like, he has some background in special teams previously, so this isn't exactly what you'd call new. I mean, he was special teams coordinator back in 2018 for University of San Diego, which is where he came to Idaho from. So we get a guy who has background at the position. Great. Hey, full disclosure, for every coach who added an extra position to their title, that means they're going to get paid. They have more responsibilities, but they get paid more. That's one of the things you can do at this level to try to keep guys around a little bit longer. But look, the Big Sky is a good special teams conference. Hey, Bobby Houck at Montana, he is their special teams coordinator, but he's about as good as it gets at the FCS. Weber State is still pretty strong too. So we've never seen Tyler Sutton as a special teams coordinator here, so we don't have fruits to speak of at this point. But he's a guy who's done well at virtually everything we've seen here. He did well at San Diego as an OC. So that rotation in particular, I was happy about.
So that kind of leads into, again, as you mentioned at the start of that, special teams coordinator, obviously a big hole to fill there with Thomas Ford leaving. Thomas Ford's primary duty, running backs coach. So Idaho's new running backs coach is going to be Deontay Cooper, former UW team captain. Actually, kind of an interesting story for anybody that follows FBS or Pac-12 or Pac-10 or Pac-2 or whatever the hell it's going to be now, and Big Ten, I guess, for UW. Deontay Cooper actually played for Steve Sarkisian and Chris Peterson, blew out his ACL 3 separate times, was considered a can't-miss prospect, and unfortunately just never did a ton because he tore up his knee in 2010 and then again in 2011, 2012. A bummer story for a guy that looked like he was probably going to be an NFL guy. Had a little cup of tea there. Anyways, he goes into coaching shortly after that. He ends up at Highline High School and then actually had a quite a good stretch there. If you go through again,
rehabbed a terrible program at the time.
Yes, exactly. They not great. They were 4-6 when he took them over. Very next year they went 4-0 in conference, made it to the 2A playoffs. Had the COVID year, which made stuff super weird. But then over the last 3 seasons, they went 28-7, 18-0 in league, state semifinals in 2022. Then in 2023, they made the quarterfinals, went 10-2, 10-2 back-to-back years. So very good as a high school head coach. Now finally getting his chance here as the running backs coach at Idaho. As Martin says in the chat, hey, I remember him when he first signed at Washington. and then Highline was ass back when he played them in 2009, 2010, 2011. So your thoughts, Bryan, on Deontay Cooper as the new Vandal running backs coach?
So it's hard to bring up reaction to Cooper without reaction to other positions. But one of the things that I like, and this was persistent with Jason Eck's first staff, the guys who rolled over year 2 and now year 3 when he's having to reassemble. I like that what Eck does. It honestly feels like the opposite of what Bobby Houck until recently did at Montana, which is Eck has a pretty broad has chosen to hire guys and offer guys that gives a very broad range of experience, both coaching experience, lived experience, playing experience, and then of course recruitment footprint experience. So Deontay Cooper, easily youngest guy on the staff. It's his first. This is his first college coaching job, or not. He's close to Matt Linehan's age, but he's young. He's the least experienced guy at the college level, but like doesn't bother me at all. Like, hey, phase 1, he's probably why Marquand McCraney is coming to Idaho, the highest rated recruit in like Idaho/Big Sky history around there, which we all know. They cannot, not trying to dismiss recruiting work. We all know recruitment ratings don't necessarily pan out, but recruitment ratings are also not like completely rectally derived. I'll just say like, hey, there's some obvious athleticism for McCraney. That's why he's rated as high as he is. Well, Cooper's probably a big reason why he's over here. So phase 1, we have that. Phase 2, one of the big PTSD moments I had when Thomas Ford left was the success that Idaho had recruiting in the Western Washington region. You wouldn't say that's exactly because of Thomas Ford, but it certainly was a meaningful reason why Idaho did as well in that area. And Deontay Cooper looks like he'll help replace some of that potentially lost influence with Ford leaving. I don't think Idaho's really competing with Oregon State for recruits out of that region for the most part. And hey, Tom Kendall saying Tracy Ford, huge help. Well, hey, I have to be vague here, but let's just say the guys that Tracy Ford might have helped funnel to Idaho, I'm not worried about them not being funneled to Idaho with this new hire. So look, I think it checks some boxes, and I just like the homogeneous nature of the staff. The heterogeneous nature, the heterogeneous nature of the staff of young guys, old guys, guys who are rising, guys who are settling, guys who are moving up to new coordinating positions, guys who are bouncing back to position coaches. It covers a ton of potential experiences, and there's a ton of different ways where you can explain how the type of guy who's going to connect with different players or recruit different players here, that box is checked. So that's a long way of saying, cool with it, man. I like it.
Yeah, just in the press release, obviously, X has some nice things. Joel Thomas recommended Deontay. I believe Martin said that Eck had said at the signing day event that Ford recommended him. This is obviously a coach who comes to us with high praise. Probably not a guy who's going to be here very long if the running backs look really good. It feels like, hey, he might be just having a touchover stop in Moscow on the way to trying to build a career. Hopefully he's here for a very long, successful time, but feels like that's gonna go on. Jason Mayer saying his twin brother DeAndre is the director of player recruitment at ASU. So again, there's that. Kenny Dillingham came through the Pacific Northwest and is trying to build that Arizona State program. Bryan, just the last thing you mentioned specifically, like, hey, it's really cool to see that like there are coaches on the swing up. There are coaches that are maybe not settling, but coaches that are taking a step down from where they were. That does take us to the final addition to the coaching staff. Hunter Hughes, the new Sams and Nichols coach. Patty Frakes in the comment section. Shit, I'm late. What did I miss? Patty, you missed everything, man. You missed the rip-roaringest 14 minutes we've ever had. Anyways, Hunter Hughes comes to us, interestingly enough, from pro football. Last year, he was actually in the USFL. He was the defensive backs and a quality control coach for the New Orleans Breakers, who did end up going 7-3, but the XFL and the USFL merged. They cut half the teams. Unfortunately, the Breakers were cut. Their head coach actually continued on and got a job with a different team, but hey, Hughes was left out on the outside looking in and is now coming to Idaho to be the Sam and Nichols coach. previously before the USFL. He was at West Texas A&M. He was a D2 head coach there, where Bryan will be thrilled by this. In his final game as head coach, Bryan, he lost to the vaunted Simon Fraser, whatever their mascot was by the time they were falling apart.
Dancing Maple Leafs.
There we go. The Dancing Maple Leafs. Very unfortunate that, again, final loss there was Simon Fraser. He did end up going 32-29 in his career there, and ended up having a season where they went 7-4, 5-2 in conference. So had a good season there. But Bryan, your thoughts on Coach Hughes coming in as the final position coach here against Sams and Nichols?
Well, there's also one other position rotation to get to with coaching, but so look, this is the inverse of Cooper. This is a guy, when we talk about Hunter Hughes, he's a guy who you already hit some of his background. He has head coaching background, he has defensive coordinator background, he has position coach background. I like it, I guess. Hey, Eck didn't have a Sam's safeties coach last season. Bobby J was safeties coach. Sorry guys, I'm getting myself lost in a sea of tabs. Sams and Nichols, my bad. Sams and Nichols coach. We didn't have that last season, so that just is part of what Dan Jackson putting his footprint down of what the defense is going to look like coaching wise as well. So hey, slightly different, but this sounds like an overqualified position coach to me. Look, you talked about his D2 run. Like overall, he was solid at West Texas A&M, a little bit over 500. You can understand why that didn't parlay to another head coaching position. But simultaneously, when he was at CSU Pueblo, he was the DC for a team that finished at national championship season 2014, made the playoffs 6 times, did very well as a DC there. So look, I mean, again, overqualified position coach, sign me up for those all day, man.
Yeah. So for anybody super curious, CSU Pueblo actually shut down their program from 1985 to 2007. So when they returned in 2008, Hunter Hughes was the first defensive coordinator of Colorado State Pueblo in their third iteration here. So in just that time from 2008 to, again, he coached there for 10 years or so, but they won a national championship 6 years in, from a program that had not existed since 1984. He comes in, is the defensive coordinator. His very first season, they're 37th fewest points in the nation during competition. Again, it's D2, so it's not like he went in there and had this extreme explosion of, wow, where did this come from? Like, it is D2 football. Let's lower our expectations a little bit. But then they shut out Minnesota State Mankato in the D2 national championship game in 2014. Like, the guy has obviously some coordinating chops here, or coordinated chops.
Not to jump in, but I think also, if I remember right, Eck, I think also might have been the OC, the coordinator on that Minnesota Mankato staff in 2014 as well.
Tubbs stats department will get back in on that and check on that. So again, that could be where some of that familiarity comes from. But was 2011's Football Scoop D2 Coordinator of the Year. Again, a guy who has proven after 10 years there, where you win a national championship after starting the program over, there's no way to spin that negatively. That is a hell of a job by a coach there. So feel great to have him in as the Sams Nichols, Bryan. Again, a guy that has proven time and time again pretty successful there. Starting a program from scratch is nearly impossible in this day and age, and to do it and win a title 6 years in, that's nothing short of outstanding.
So that Minnesota State Mankato team that CSU Pueblo shut out in 2014, OC Jason Eck, DC Jake Dickert.
That's props to the Tubbs
Washington State football coach Jake Dickert.
That's a good recollection there, Martin. I don't know if I would have clocked that immediately, but again, that makes sense. There's Tom Kendall jumping in. There's the unofficial Tubbs stats department. Eck was the OC for the record-setting offense at Minnesota State Mankato during back-to-back Northern Sun Intercollegiate Conference Championships in 2013 and 2014. So, again, a guy that Eck's got some familiarity with. Again, was on a trajectory of, hey, got a head coach, was technically in pro football. I know it's not the NFL, but again, guys like Bob Stoops are in there. Wade Phillips is still in there. Like, there's guys that have either coached at the top of college football or top of the NFL and is now here at Idaho. So I was probably not maybe where he exactly wanted to be, but thrilled to have him here. Expect to see good things out of, again, the Sams and Nichols. Any final thoughts, Bryan?
No, sorry. I'm scrolling through the 2014 Minnesota Mankato roster just for fun now. But no, dude, like, hey, Dallas, you essentially hit on the main points. And again, I'm just going to double down for 1 second. I like the spectrum of experience, spectrum of backgrounds that Jason Eck brought in. And hey, this is not shocking with Jason Eck. This isn't shocking as a typical coaching thing. A lot of the guys that he picks, you can see where in his background he either worked with them or worked against them. So yeah, I like it. There is one other coaching piece we had to get to, which is Matt Linehan is the recruitment coordinator now, which I don't have anything to add there other than I'm glad Linehan has an additional responsibility, keeps him here a little bit longer, gets him paid a little bit more, and early fruits. Again, like we won't know anything in a material sense about the signing class until at the earliest for some of them spring football. And then for many, it won't be for a couple years. So like, hey, we'll know how well that went in the future. But at this point, I don't know like what evidence you would have to say other than, hey, Matt Linehan appeared to keep the machine churning. Mission accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to me, it feels like a no-brainer. When you look at the coaches that are on the staff, not to say anything to take away from any of those guys, but okay, you're looking at the guy on the staff who is the youngest and is the most recent Vandal legend. Like, that to me makes more sense than anything else you could pitch for anybody else being the recruiting coordinator at this point. Absolutely love the idea of having Matt Linehan head that up. You talk about a guy that loves this school. Matt Linehan is one of the first people that comes to mind. And that's typically what again, not a huge recruiting guy. That's Martin's expertise. And obviously Patty helps us out from time to time. But man, when I think of if I was a high school kid trying to be convinced to go somewhere, I really want a coach that loves this place. And I couldn't name a whole lot of Vandals that probably love this place more than Matt Linehan.
So with that said, guys, that's our football update.
With that being said, Bryan. Sorry.
So that's all right. We have a natural shift we'll get to, but it's weird. I feel like I have to clear my throat for this. We're finally going to get to talk basketball again. This will be the second time this season with new head coach Alex Pribble that we've been able to talk about basketball.
I'm sorry. Jason is triggering me in the comment section. He's bringing up Scott Linehan. There's a reason I brought up only Matt, Jason. We're not going to talk about Scott right now. The hurt is still too real. Anyways, Bryan, on to Vandal basketball.
I think you need to check the private chat. There was one other thing we're going to go over first.
Oh, see, I didn't realize that we were going to do that first. It's so early in the show. Usually that comes at like the 30 to 40 minute range, and it's more tacked on in the back there.
Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Perfect timing. I don't know. I was not prepared, guys, because can you ever be prepared for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation that's right in your backyard? Because Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and guess what? They're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. You could check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike the scenic trails, spot the wildlife, soak in the beautiful natural hot springs, and fish the most remote stretches of river in the entire country. Just bring your clothes, and let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 406-540-4450. Again, 406-540-4450, or check them out at hughesriver.com. With that being said, damn it, I screwed it up. Oh, gosh darn it. And I'm swearing. Man, just amateur hour on Tubbs, guys. It's anyways, Bryan, speaking of moving past amateur hour, which is what the Vandal basketball program has been doing this year, it's time to talk Pribble, Bryan. Vandals only have 9 wins so far, but that would have been a pretty damn good year in the Zach Kloss era. Bryan, you are our basketball expert. I want you to take the wheel from me, because otherwise I'm going to crash us right into a cliff. Where are we going with Vandal basketball? What do you want to talk about?
I want to get us updated on where we're at, because honestly, the last 4 games, it's felt like Idaho's turned over a new leaf. So let's get caught up on the season briefly. So Idaho sits at 9-15 overall, 7-15 versus D1 teams, but 2 of those are Power 5. So you want to call that 7-13 the actual record. Go ahead. But at 9-15 overall, we're 1 win away from tying the Zach Kloss mark from last year, 2 from beating it. So hey, phase 1, just get to that 11th win, man. Please just get that 11th win. But look, the basic run Idaho has been on is, like, it turned out Idaho's out-of-conference schedule was pretty damn weak, which is part of why there is as much faith on the show initially heading into conference play on the show as there was. Since then, Idaho in conference play started off right away with a win back around New Year's over Sacramento State, and then 8 consecutive losses, which included a loss to St. Thomas from the Summit League. And the last 4 games I want to spend talking about are, because the leaf that's been turned over is looking in that 8-game losing streak Idaho had. For the most part, the Vandals just were not scoring. Here, scoring 72 against Portland State, 67 versus St. Thomas, 58 against Eastern, 59 against Idaho State, 65 against Weber, 60 against NAU, 68 against Northern Colorado. And this is kind of when we turn over a leaf after that the blowout loss at home to Northern Colorado. The last 4 games, Idaho is 2-2 with close losses at Montana, 73-70, and then last Saturday at Eastern, 87-79, although that game was in doubt until 60 seconds left in the game. Sandwiched in between those 2 losses or wins at Montana State, 81-75, and at Sacramento State, 61-45. The reason I want to focus on those last 4 games is, look, in that run of 8 consecutive losses, Idaho just wasn't scoring. Like, this is a relatively solid defensive team. You can see they play hard. You can see they have strategy that they work for. But, Idaho was hanging close in the first half of the games and getting their ass kicked in the second half. The issue was teams go on runs eventually in basketball. And if you can't make a couple shots to push back, what do? You lose. So that's what Idaho did for about 8 games in a row, was be either leading at halftime or just narrowly behind at halftime, and then just not put it together in the second half. These last 4 games, it's been different. And it's been different in a surprising way, because first off, my quote unquote sweetheart on the team, Tyler Lindhart, he's probably out for the year. Pribble said it again, the press conference this week. They don't have Lindhart's doing everything he can to get back on the floor, but with an undisclosed injury, the expectation is he's not back this season. Couple that with Tyler Murris, who broke his ankle early, in like second game of the season. He dressed for the Eastern game, but he's not playing. And Pribble made it pretty clear he's probably not going to play this year either. So yeah, that's 2 potential contributors out. Idaho's been starting to get contributions from places it wasn't getting it quite as much early. One of which is Kyson Rose. Kyson Rose he started at the 4 spot, which is, hey, power forward, if you're not familiar with that term. He started the season as the 4 for Idaho, then went to the bench when Lindhart emerged. Then when Lindhart was hurt, Rose came back in. And in the last 3 games for Idaho, Rose has played last 4 games, Rose has played some of his best basketball. If you want to look at his the game log for Rose, he scored over 13, between 13 and 15 in each of the last 3 games. And he's doing so early in the season. He was essentially a spot up 3 shooter. He's not doing that anymore. They're getting him rolling to the basket. They're getting him in post-up situations. He's just contributing in ways he had not been before, which is what Idaho needed. If they're not going to, they don't have any all Big Sky talent on the team. They needed to get a little more bump up in production from a handful of guys. Kyson Rose is one of them. Dallas.
Yeah, honestly, Bryan, the one thing I've seen in the last handful of games here is that it is really nice seeing Kyson Rose develop, obviously. But between Rose and Mims, it feels like you're pretty confident and you're going to get somewhere between 25 and 30 points. Sometimes there's nights that aren't quite that, but it feels like you're going to get, you know what you're going to get out of those guys. Between the two of them, you're going to get short of 30, more than 20, hopefully somewhere in that 25-30 range. And then you're waiting on the rest of the guys to pick it up. So you mentioned that 8-game losing streak and just not scoring particularly well. Well, what happens when you're not scoring particularly well at the end of games? You're going to be gassed. Your defense just can't hold on much longer. Like it just happens. It happens in all sports. If you can't score enough, eventually your defense just isn't able to keep things going the whole 60 minutes or 48 minutes or whichever sport it is, however long it goes. At the end of the game, if you're not putting the points up, you're just not going to be able to do it. It is really nice to see, especially in that Eastern game. I know they did lose, but a little bit better guard play. I've noticed a little bit better contribution. Bryan, EJ Neal in particular against Eastern, 20 points, 7 for 13 shooting, 3 from 6 from 3. I thought that was a really nice thing to see, and hopefully that will continue. Seeing some of the guard play again explode. 15 points for Neal in that win against Sacramento State. So getting a little bit of that guard play moving.
I want to add more on EJ Neal too, which is, look, the recruiting class that made up Pribble's roster, which, hey, we all know he started that late in the game. That's the nature of taking over the way he did. It's a combination of, it's mostly transfers. There's a couple freshmen, but mostly Pribble's group is transfers. And there's a mix of D1 transfers, junior college transfers, and D2 transfers. And it's not shocking to see a guy like EJ Neal. He's a junior college transfer. It's not shocking to see those guys take about a year to really find their footing once they land from a junior college to a D1 school. Like if you're really long in the teeth, you might remember BJ Blake back in 2015, 2016. He was solid his first year at Idaho, then took a huge step his second year. If you want to remember a little bit less far back, Dom Ford for Idaho, he was a guy we talked about. Hey, maybe he's one of the few who we want to stay around. He's averaging 17 a game at Southern Utah right now. Which is to say, look, hey, better opportunity for that dude. But the point being, it can take junior college guys a little bit of time to find their footing. And my hope is that the recent spike in production we have out of EJ Neal is because he found his footing. We really hadn't gotten much out of him for a lot of the year, but EJ Neal is longer. He's athletic and he's a solid catch and shoot player. But the thing that's been different in these last 2 games, Sacramento State and then Eastern, when he scored both those games were his high scoring days for Idaho, 15 and 20. But what he did in those games that was different is he put the ball on the floor. EJ Neal got to the rim and finished, which that's something Idaho just been in that run of 8 losses. They were getting nothing out of the perimeter, minus they were getting some points out of Denker, but Denker's solid, but he doesn't create good, easy looks that often. What EJ Neal is making is he's making wide open threes and he's getting in stride layups, AKA easy points. And Idaho just hadn't been getting any of that. So in addition to the fact that Neal's a long defensive presence, the fact that he's putting points on the board, you got to wonder how long he's going to be off the bench. Because he's certainly the last 2 games, he's contributing more than like Trevon Blasingame, who is the 5th starter for Idaho. But Idaho's kind of rotated what they use at that 3 spot. Earlier in the year, they went bigger with injuries. They've had to change up because Linhart's not there anymore. But I got my eye on Trevon Blasingame plays the 3 for Idaho right now. I'm curious how much longer EJ Neal can perform like this and not get starters minutes, because he, in particular, has been a huge addition to get penetration on the offensive end that Idaho just didn't get at all early. And that was the big problem I took away from Vandal Hoops earlier is they honestly looked when a team contributes real well, Dallas, in the first half, and then it kind of falls apart in the second, there's essentially two interpretations. We know one, like the brain dead one is, okay, coach didn't do second half adjustments. I don't think that's the case. The other interpretation is, no, like the coaching staff did their job and got an under-talented group ready to play, and they showed up. They don't have tape of what the other team's adjustments are going to be. They've already maxed out on what they're going to do. So the issue is other teams adjusting and Idaho not being able to follow, not as a put down, but as they were maximizing their talents in the first half. If Idaho's going to keep scoring points like they did the last 4 games, hey, this is a different matter. And we're finally looking at a team that, Dallas, the Big Sky has, they've been in Boise for about 5 years. Idaho hasn't won a Big Sky Conference tournament game in 6 seasons. This is the 7th we're running into. The tournament has not been played yet. But look, this dates back to the last good team that Don Verlin had, which that team had a bye in 2016-17, and then they got a first round bye. Then they lost to Southern Utah in the one game they played. It hasn't been since 2016 that Idaho won a Big Sky Conference tournament game. You got it. That has to be right at the top of the list of things you're trying to check off this year. And if the team's going to play like they did the last 4 games, and suddenly this doesn't look like a bottom of the conference Big Sky team.
Yeah, this is absolutely, again, you're talking about losing to Eastern, yes, by 8, but again, close game until the final minute. That Eastern team is 10-1 in the Big Sky. That Eastern team is for real. And you're talking about an Idaho team going in there and it not looking like a fluke. Again, for those that aren't watching the games and more just listening to the games or even just listening to us talk about them or looking at box scores, or maybe you've just checked out of Vandal basketball completely. It is very apparent. You watch the team for 5 minutes and it's a different coached team. It feels, Bryan, like there's just more. There's more growth happening here than we've seen in a lot of time. And I want to specifically mention, you mentioned Blasingame and Neal and how long will it be until Neal is getting starter minutes. I would argue he's already started getting the starter minutes. Blasingame played 16 minutes in starting against Sacramento State, and Neal had 22. Against Eastern, Blasingame had 11 minutes and Neal had 29. Like I feel like Pribble is catching onto this. Will Neal start next game? Not sure. Will he start at all this season? Not sure. But I do think you can kind of just see it in watching the games that like Neal is starting to get more run. Hopefully, again, like you said, that's him kind of figuring it out a little bit. But as Tom Kendall says, hey, we do need better guard play. Hopefully, Neal and Minnis can keep it up. Minnis has had a couple nice games recently. But just looking at this team, Bryan, it feels like maybe winning in Boise is a stretch still. Again, we're still talking about a team that's 3-8 in the Big Sky. Absolutely going to be one of the bottom four schools. Not going to be getting out of that first round, but there's potential here for the first time in what feels, honestly, Bryan, like it's been. I mean, the before COVID times. Like it's been a long time since we've had the real belief here that hey, maybe things are moving in the right direction. And Patty Frank's in the comment section. Looks like Minnis tweaked an ankle Saturday. Hopefully he's going to be all right. But Tom Kendall says, hey, to me, it feels like they're 1 or 2 players away, and Russ might be one of those. Again, you lose Russ immediately. You lose, again, Bryan, I know how much of a Linhart fan you were. You lose Linhart. Like, unfortunately, things are just not going super well right now, even if this team is purely healthy. I'm not saying they'd be a sure shot to win a game in Boise, but I certainly feel like there's a little bit better chance of that than I did the last 4 years, where it was just we knew going in they just weren't going to get it done.
Well, the reason I bring up Boise is one, like the obvious. Like, this is de facto home court advantage for Idaho, and in half a decade, Idaho has no wins. It's indefensible. But secondarily, so just looking at conference stats for a second, talking about scoring margin, the way the conference is split, the scoring margin explains it pretty damn well. Eastern Washington is winning conference games by an average of 12.5 points. They're better than everyone. It's not close. They should win the league, and they should win the conference tournament at the end. After Eastern, you have Weber and Northern Colorado, they have scoring margins below 7 and above 6. So they're tier 2. Tier 3, you have Montana State, who Idaho just beat, Montana and Idaho State, all with scoring margins between 1 and 1.8. So hey, that's that middle group. Like, hey, they play a ton of close games. They don't blow out anyone really. And then the bottom 4, which has PSU, top 5 Portland State, Idaho, Northern Arizona, and Sac State, all with scoring margins between -6 and -8.6. Sac State's at the bottom. Well, Dallas, those 4 teams are going to make up the first 2 games of the conference tournament, just like they did last year when Idaho did not win. So I think of those 4 teams, look, Idaho doesn't have a great record in the round robin with those 4. They beat Sacramento State twice and have lost to Portland State competitively, and then lost to NAU in like the worst basketball game I've ever seen. But I don't think Idaho's the least talented out of that group of 4. And if they can score more than 60 points, it's on the table to beat any of those teams. And that's who they're looking at potentially in Boise. But you talked about things that haven't happened in forever. Like the slate of games this week is Weber State on Thursday. So this is in Moscow. And then hosting Idaho State this Saturday. And look, Weber State, Idaho is going to be picked to lose. They've got Dylan Jones, who's one of the 2 people who's potentially going to be Big Sky Player of the Year this year. St. Thomas on Northern Colorado is the other one. There's only 2 choices to pay attention to. But Idaho State, man, I got to hit this up. We all know it's been a while. Dallas, I told you before the show, but I'm going to pretend I didn't. How long has it been since Idaho beat Idaho State?
I mean, the before times. That's I think all that needs to be said. It's before COVID happened and the world kind of changed. Like, it's been that long.
Yeah. The last time Idaho beat Idaho State was March 7th, 2020. So yeah, for you guys, remember what's happened and all that, what feels like 600 years. Because that again, like you brought it up, like, hey, we're not going to talk about COVID as like our main topic, guys. But it was pre-COVID that Idaho beat Idaho State last. And I on the show said Idaho was going to beat Idaho State this year. I think they should. I think they absolutely can. But that's a big marker for Idaho to hit potentially this Saturday. And to do a quick preview of that game, Idaho State doesn't score well at all. That's part of why like the game should be competitive. If Idaho can put a couple points, now Idaho State defense pretty well, but if Idaho can score around 70-ish, they can win this game, which 70 is not asking the world. Averaging 70 points per game would put you at Idaho State level, number 6 in Big Sky play. So the two games coming up. If I care about one over the other, obviously I want Idaho to pick up wins, but Weber State has underperformed this year. They're not a bad team. They should be the number 2 team in the conference, but they're not. The Idaho State game is we have to finally pick up a win. Hey, Tom Kendall in the comments section saying there'll be tailgating for the ISU game. I'm hearing yes, the Vandalizers published this, but also we have some patrons in Only Tub Discord who brought up, and just some other Vandal fans who they're gonna Martin Arnzen. Sorry if I took your name in vain there, dude. They're going to be tailgating at around 11:30-ish for the 2:00 game. So if you're in Moscow, if you're and you're looking for something to do, hit the basketball tailgate. It won't be full parking lot, but new traditions have to start somewhere, guys. So look, Dallas, I just put you on the shelf basketball-wise for quite a while. So, and you're kind of more of a listener on this episode anyway, getting caught up on basketball. So I guess, hey, after what we talked about, what else Vandal basketball in your mind are you not clear on, or you think we should be focusing on heading into this week's games?
Bryan, as somebody who has watched considerably less basketball than you have, it's one of my lesser favorite sports and just life things going on. I just haven't had the ability to watch a ton of games. Who are the guys that I should be focusing on as hey, you know what? It's cool. Vandal basketball's going to start turning it around, but next year and year 3 and even year 4 of Pribble and when we're all expecting things to have really improved, who are the people I should be paying attention to? That's kind of the question I want to ask, because I know that there's we don't have the the viewership for basketball like we do football. So for the people that are here and invested and are wanting to get into basketball, who are the faces and guys that people should be like, hey, this is a building block. This is a guy who could contribute here for a couple of years.
Okay, it's a short-term, long-term question. Because hey, short-term, guys, Idaho, the goal is obviously to win as many games as Idaho can. But this is not a team that's going to compete for Big Sky Championship. This is not a team that's going to win the tournament in Boise. This is playing for culture, which, hey, Pribble talks about that a ton in his pressers, that year one, a lot of the focus is to build the culture of the program, which Idaho has a half decade worth of, as far as winning is concerned, garbage culture to turn around. But in addition to building culture, look, there's one senior on the roster, D'Angelo Minnis, starting point guard. There's no prayer that only one roster spot turns over next year. I don't care what's said in any sort of press conference. I don't care what else has been enunciated publicly about any player. One, we know players just transfer, like that does happen. But two, like this is Pribble's livelihood. One way or another, he's going to get some open roster spots because this team, Idaho, should be better. I think that we have some guys emerging that are explaining why Idaho's doing better like the last 4 games than early in conference play. But big picture, Pribble wants to win conference titles. He's not doing it with this roster. They have to get some new guys. So short term, Julius Mims he's a junior. He's a transfer from North Idaho College. On the season, Julius Mims is averaging 11.6 points per game, 7.3 rebounds. He's a rim runner, which is to say he's a post. He's about 6'9". He's a very good jumper. He's not bulky. He's not a guy you want to call post up ISOs for, but he's been a relatively solid finisher. He gets a ton of dunks. He also can make he's a solid catch and shoot wide open threes kind of post. He's a building block that could start on virtually every single Big Sky team because he's scoring right around 12 points, but you don't have to call almost any plays for him. And he's one of the best. If he's not the best shot blocker in the Big Sky, he's the second. I don't know who else would be the second. He's one of the few true rim protectors in the Big Sky. He's on Idaho. In addition to Mims, leading scorer is Quinn Danker. Danker, he's a D2 transfer as well. He's averaging 12.3 points per game on the season. Shooting percentages are not exactly lighting the world on fire. He's a junior, shooting 40% from the field, 34% from 3. I expect Danker is going to be on the roster next year, but like the bigger deal for Danker, for Idaho and Danker, is I expect he'll be a guy who's going to come back. And he's a kind of classic combo guard that maybe you wish was your 6th man, in that he can be a nominal point guard. He's a solid catch and shoot player. He just, you wish he didn't have to try to create some shots for himself because that's not what you'd call his cup of tea. But he's going to be a guy for sure who I expect is going to be around for the next couple of years or so. And hey, it's not meaningless to lead the team in scoring. So hey, that's another name to pay attention to. We talked about Tyler Murris for like 1 second. You're not going to see him on the floor because he's injured, but he's rangy and he can shoot. That's what Idaho's missing out of Murris. Then we have Tyler Lindhart, who, hey, that's my guy in Big Sky plays, averaging right around 10, 11 points per game. Transfer from University of Washington, kind of like EJ Neal. I think he just took time to get comfortable with D1 play because at UW he didn't really play very much at all. And he signed at UW initially from a small school in Washington. So it's just a big jump. So realistically, he hadn't been playing the way he'd been used to for a long time, but he's strong, has strong footwork in the post, easily the best post footwork on the team. He's actually a guy you want to call post up ISOs for. Solid catch and shoot 3 shooter, but kind of like both Lindhart and Kyson Rose are the same in that they're both solid 3 shooters that you want. You don't want them shooting more than 2 or 3 threes a game wide open. And the way the offense had cycled for a while, both those guys were shooting, in my mind, too many threes. That's part of why Rose has been so great these last 3 games. Crashing the boards, run into the rim on pick and rolls, getting more opportunistic looks in it, which is what he needs to look for. In addition to Rose is also is a solid back to the basket player. But those are kind of the post guys to watch for. And then on the wing, man, these are the guys who I think they're competing for who is for sure going to be on the team next year and who is fighting for minutes. We already talked about EJ Neal on the show. today. We referenced Trevon Blasingame, who he's averaging 4 points a game on the season. Looks like he's rangy, like he's 6'4" and long. Hasn't found his stroke really on the season, shooting 40% from the field, 37.5 from three, but not on great volume. Then we've got D'Angelo Minnis. He's the senior, about 5'7". It's listed 5'9". He's not 5'9", averaging just under 10 on the season, but shooting 39.6% from the field. Him in the Minnis in the Eastern game, that was one of the things that was big, and he's one of the guys paying attention to this year's. Minnis scored 17, shooting 6 of 14, but also picking up 4 assists. And like, hey, Pribble hit on this, the presser against Eastern. Idaho tallied 20 assists on 29 made field goals. Then against, if you look at the Sacramento State game, 12 assists on 22 made field goals. If you look at the Montana State game, 13 assists on 31 made field goals. You're starting to drift a little bit in the wrong direction. But the big thing is Pribble wants the team to get more assists because this is not like an ISO-oriented team. And Minnis is a guy who can help get assists. He can break teams down a little bit off the dribble. A lot of teams don't send help when Minnis penetrates, and that's part of why we got the production that we do out of him so far. But hey, to cycle through all that stuff, try to sum it up in like a easily digestible form, Dallas. This Idaho team plays hard. This Idaho team plays a fun style. Like, do not look at the points per game total as indicative of a slow pace. They don't play a purposely slow pace like Idaho State. It's just a ton of guys who are clearly learning on the fly because it's their first year contributing at this level. And if Idaho can get enough step ups in production from guys like EJ Neal, if he can continue some of that, if Rose can continue some of that, and if Idaho can get rotating production from a third guy, that could be Minnis, but that also it could be other guys too. If Idaho can get that a little bit extra from a few guys, that's how you go from scoring 62, 64 to scoring 74, 75, and suddenly you're a threat to win almost every single game. Franklin Spicer comment section saying, if Minnis is 5'10", Sacramento State is the best team in the conference. Thank you, Franklin. Yeah, and I've met Minnis. He's a nice dude. He's not 5'10". No, absolutely no chance. So, hey, a long way of saying, I think this team's fun to watch. And I think if you haven't given Idaho basketball a shot, you should. Just keep in mind that it's the first year. There is growth. But hey, the team plays fast. The team plays fun. This is not a parade of self-inflicted gunshot wounds like we're used to from the last half decade. It's just there's some talented teams in the Big Sky, and Idaho has been an Idaho State level rebuild. And in basketball, well, that doesn't take a year. It takes time. Idaho has some solid building blocks, but what I'm paying attention to from here on is which guys are emerging to be contributors on a good Big Sky team, because those are the guys that I think are going to hopefully stay.
Yeah, one last comment about Minnis there. Patty Frakes in the comment section. I'm 5'6". When I've stood next to Minnis, I was looking directly into his eyes, which I do not do very often. I also am not one for eye contact either, Patty, so I get it. Bryan, if you were Coach Pribble right now, I appreciate that for anybody paying attention. Bryan making very seductive eye contact with me through the webcam. Very, very weird for such a public show. But hey, you know what? Hashtag only tubs, baby. Bryan, if you were Coach Pribble in the same kind of position that Cody Hawkins is in at Idaho State, of like, this is a program that the administration let die with terrible coaching hires before him. When you look at this roster, what does he need to get in, again, the portal, fresh recruits? What are you looking for specifically to take this team to the next level?
Well, look, one, to keep it this year, we've seen guys on this team take developmental steps at kind of weird points in the year. Like, hey, Lindhart took a developmental step after like his 4th or 5th game. And then these last couple, EJ Neal has stepped up. So like the very first thing is, we're going to see guys who are on this roster take steps this year that can kind of intimate what they'll be next year. In particular, guys, I'm buying EJ Neal stock right now. He looks like exactly the kind of guy who Idaho needs. And he's as a good defender who's long and can catch and shoot. I guess here's another kind of lens I like to look at basketball players from is, hey, could this guy start on the best or one of the best teams in the conference? And if EJ Neal is going to play like he did against Eastern, He could start on a lot of teams, but we've got to see that more than twice. We've seen it twice on the season. 2's a trend, but we got to see it happen regularly before we say this is baked into what Idaho has. So the main thing, Tom Kendall says point guard in the comment section. I'm not going to disagree exactly with that. What I will say is Idaho has had so long this year where they cannot generate easy buckets. And that comes from not having enough guards who can put the ball on the floor and get to the hoop or finish layups in stride, or they can make one hard move to go by their guy without having to try to set up the move with, like 3 or 4 crossovers, which, hey, like not to put down to Menace. That's what he has to do, partially because he's like 5'6" and he's playing against a lot of tall dudes. So like not a put down. If that's what you need to do, sweet, you should do it. As a team, Idaho doesn't have enough shot creators. And when I say that, it's they don't have guys who, one, can get points when the offense breaks down, or two, they've had too many times where a pick and roll doesn't really do anything because the defense is not concerned about the dribbler on the pick and roll. So they can just sag. So Idaho needs guys who can be more dynamic off the dribble. But then additionally, do not disagree with Tom Kendall. Again, in the comment section, he says Idaho needs more shooting. And I feel like the jury is both in and not, which is, hey, Idaho's the number 5 team in the Big Sky in 3-point percentage in conference. They're 34.9. But also when Idaho lost 8 games in a row, there was a lot of garbage time minutes that baked in there. And I just feel like part of Idaho not getting good looks that I described earlier is also that that doesn't help wide open shooters get good looks. But simultaneously, if Idaho had some electric 3 shooters, that would create openings for penetration because you have to guard that chest to chest. And Idaho does not have those, at least with Murris out. Idaho does not have those. So a little bit more shooting, a lot more dribble penetration. And otherwise, like, hey, keep Mims. He's good. Keep Lindhart. He's solid. Keep Rose. He's emerging. That's 3 guys who can push each other for those starting 2 spots. So I guess a long way to boil that down is I want to see what kind of development Idaho gets from the perimeter before the end of the year. But look, this is kind of Big Sky 101. It's a smaller conference league. Typically, this is a guard to wing driven league. There are guards and wings to get that will go to a school like Idaho, that'll go to a school like Eastern Washington. Idaho just needs to get those with a little more athleticism and a little more dynamism off the dribble.
As you could say, maybe you need some pribble dribble.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Thank you. Hashtag only Tubbs. Patreon.com/Tubbs the Club. Contribute to the show. Contribute to our shitty inside jokes. Get our tips when we have them. That's when we guys
just
get news,
the tips.
This is actually one of the things that was weird for the show is we talked about Dan Jackson in the Discord like 2 weeks before he was announced, which then made it weird, like talking on the show. It felt like it was old news. But anyway, patreon.com/Tubbs the Club costs as little as a shitty cup of coffee. You can certainly pay more, and we love when people pay more. But support the show, patreon.com/Tubbs the Club. The Discord during football season is pretty wild. It's also pretty active most of the year. So help us out. Help yourself out. Join the Patreon.
With that, any final thoughts from the man on the bench, Mr. Martin Heemstra? Kristy Mayer jumping in the comment section. She's got the pribble dribble. Martin, do you have the pribble dribble?
I need to talk to my doctor first. But I'm not the men's basketball guy, and I know I haven't talked about women's much this year. Maybe I'll just hop on StreamYard and do my own quick 10-minute video to talk about what's been going on so far. But just as more of a fan, more than watching the men's team, the games are actually fun this year, not just yesterday. I went to just rage watch the men's team's games in ICC Arena. This year, I'm with Patrick. And they're actually fun to watch and talk about. It's not like sitting through stats 251 for an hour, just trying to struggle through.
No, for a sub 500 team, I think they're weirdly fun to watch.
It's like it's like they actually have like good moments, like with Mims's dunks and like the layups they get to them. It is very entertaining to watch them play.
No, you can see there's a lot of what Idaho does that like Eastern does. Eastern's just been cooking for a while, which makes sense. Hey, Pribble was on that Jim Hayford staff in 2014, 2015, the Eastern that made the NCAA tournament, the Tyler Harvey team, the Vinky Joyce team. All those assistants, guys, David Riley, Shantae Leggins, now Alex Pribble, they're all head coaches doing their thing at other schools. You can see where that style, and that's probably why I brought up the style not being Idaho State. No, like there's not a bunch of like meaningless motion early, just meant to milk the shot clock. No, give Pribble some time. Like I'm still all in on Pribble. I don't really give a shit what the record is. I've seen progress. I've seen where you can know why this team's going to be fun. It's just now this is the point where as fans it sucks, but like, hey, we got to be patient. And what do you do while you're being patient? Like Martin said, just show up and enjoy what they have. And then, hey, look at the meaningful markers we can check off. One, it can happen this Saturday. Got to finally get a win over Idaho State.
You got to get King Spud back.
Fully on board with that. Got to get King Spud back. I just wish, man, let's tie it back to football. That way it just never leaves Moscow. That's all that's got to happen. So again, I think it's blackout the arena this weekend.
I think something like that.
For Idaho State, I believe it
feels like an Idaho State troll.
It does. It really does. But I think I think it's blackout. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure I am.
Going to the crack webs, going to the website right now. Keep milking it. Keep milking it.
Black out the Bengals.
Black out the Bengals, man. It is black out the Bengals. So if you are going down to Moscow, or if you're in Moscow, remember, black out the Bengals. With that said, guys, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals. Go Vandals. Go Vandals. Go Vandals.